They don't understand that most people, I'd say the vast majority of people, are so sick of it. And they just want to cut the size of government. They don't want to give the BBC 8% of its budget. They really don't want to do that. They don't want to pay for the subscriptions of bureaucrats to Politico. The left is out of ideas. They're like an addict that is addicted and fixed on their next, I don't know, melodrama, and they know that that is destroying them. They know that people want substantive debate. They know they can't do that because they're on the losing end of that argument. They know they should not continue with these psychodramas, the strident invective, and they can't stop. Like a zombie addict, they can't stop. A long time ago, the French Foreign Secretary Talleyrand once remarked of the restoration of the French kings after the French Revolution. Unfortunately, he said, they have forgotten nothing and they've learned nothing, meaning the same thing is going to happen again and again. That's applicable to today's angry, almost addicted left. If you think about it, we have suffered now from almost a decade of Russian collusion, laptop disinformation, 5 criminal and civil suits, 91 indictments, efforts to get him off the ballot. I could go on in nauseating fashion. But they all have had 2 results. One, the people are now bored and weary with all of these psychodramas and melodramas. And 2, they're starting to see them as substitutes for substantive criticism or substantive discussion. In other words, when you have nothing to say about the border policy of Donald Trump or nothing to say about his new Jacksonian foreign policy, you revert back to form. And that's what we're seeing right now. They have forgotten nothing and they have learned nothing. So let me give you a few examples. You would think in this first 100 days of Donald Trump, there would be robust debate about economic policies, there is not. Now we're talking about Elon Musk went like this, and he went like this to the crowd, and they said he was a Nazi. And then, of course, the internet almost immediately was awash in imagery of Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. That swept over the entire world almost that Elon Musk was giving a Nazi salute. There was no evidence he did not, and that ate up a 24-hour cycle. Pete Hegseth is going to be confirmed. He weathered all of the invective. It's clear the left failed to stop him. There was no discussion in those ad hominem attacks on really critical questions for all of our security concerns. Are we short artillery shells? Is the traditional triad of submarine-based, missile-based, and airplane-based nuclear deterrent, does it still work? Are we short javelins? Should we be looking more at drones after the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine? None of that came up. It was, were you drinking? Did you have adultery, adultery, adultery? He's admitted he was a flawed person in his personal life for many years. And now all of a sudden, he's on his way to be the new defense secretary. And what happens? Is there a great new debate over a defense issue? No. We're told that his former sister-in-law, a very strong Democrat that his brother divorced, has now gone to a Democratic welcoming law firm to say that she heard his former wife say that he was cruel, or he was dangerous, or he might beat her, or he drank too much. Samantha Hegseth, his second wife, has said it was not true, and that her former sister-in-law, was simply trying to work for the Democrats to stop this nomination. And the divorce settlement shows that neither one had any complaints about spousal abuse. And yet, again, that ate up another day. Then we had General Milley came out of the woodwork, and now they're releasing interviews that he thinks Donald Trump is a fascist and is the greatest threat in history to the United States. Are we having any discussion with General Milley about the chain of command? Should we look at the Joint Chiefs, the structure to make sure that no one in this advisory capacity tries to interrupt the chain of command, as did General Milley? Should we make sure the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who is an advisor only, does not call up his Chinese counterpart and warn him that he will tip him off if Donald Trump gives an order he disagrees with? No, we're just heard fascist, 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 and then that disagreed. Sometimes these distractions, these psychodramas, melodramas are very, what's the word, trivial. Now we're discussing, is Donald Trump really president? He did not put his left hand on the Bible. Yeah, Melania had the Bible, but he didn't reach over. That must tell us something. That took over 24 hours. And of course, we had Bishop Bood, I think her name is, Marianne Bood. She was going to give this national prayer sermon. She gave it, and then she hijacked her own sermon and started haranguing Donald Trump about being too harsh, and he has to be merciful if he in the treatment of transgendered and illegal aliens. Nothing about an open border where 80 to 100,000 people are killed through imported fentanyl. Nothing about criminal aliens that hurt and maim and kill Americans. Nothing about cutting in front of the line and hurt legal applicants. Nothing about overwhelming social services so that our poor don't have the access that they previously had. No, it's just a performance art, virtue signaling way of getting attention. And indeed, the bishop went through all of the talk shows, The View, to highlight her confrontation with Donald.
Remember, everybody, about the 4 years of the whole open borders and illegal alien 12 million, that was all going merrily along until Ron DeSantis and Governor Abbott in Texas said, you know what? These people are all for illegal immigration in the abstract. What if they were in the concrete? Let's bus people up to Martha's Vineyard. So they did, not a lot, and immediately they wanted to virtue signal. So they had puff jackets and their old designer hand flow. Remember little boxes, and they went to their civic center and they gave them this, and then they thought, that's it, isn't it? I mean, don't they see how magnanimous I am? I gave them my son's puff jacket, and I had a pair of my husband's Gucci shoes, and I had an old pair of designer French sunglasses I gave to them. Yeah, and you know what? Don't we have that Range Rover with 100,000 miles? Can't we give it to them? So, but they're still here. What are we going to do? Well, we'll send them to a military base or the inner city. Well, that's great. So then they said, oh, we love you so much, we just would like you to go now. And they did. But this is a little different because now it's their servants, as we say in Latin, servi, and they want them to be parachuted in. If they could get drones, that would be the best solution that they could come up with. If you get a drone, they could ride a drone, come in the morning, land, clean the toilets, fix the house up, and then the drone could take them back to, I don't know where, they don't care, maybe a hotel in Manhattan or something, and they can deal with gangs. But they don't, and I'm talking cynically because I have this bizarre experience that I live in an area where the per capita income is somewhere between 16 and 17,000 versus one where it's 130,000, and it's only 4 hours apart. And California is 45% to 50% Hispanic because of open borders, for the most part. The majority of that population is mostly from Mexico. But this is ground zero here, where I am, because it's cheaper. And there are no rules. California is the most legal and the most illegal state. And what I mean by that is to accommodate this problem of having 11 to 12 million people who came in over the last 20 years illegally and cannot obtain parity because most came without a high school diploma, without skills, without English, without legality, without money. Then you had to have all of these social programs, but you also had to suspend the law. And when you have social programs and you suspend the law, somebody has to pay for that. So what California did is, a lot of people say to me, why is it so hyper-regulated? Why do they measure the height of your mailbox in Atherton? Or why, when I want to take out a eucalyptus branch in Menlo Park, I got to get a permit? Or why do we have all the, well, because we have no regulations where I live. So, well, I do, but so within my 2-mile radius, I would say there's 10 compounds. And traditionally this means an old ranch-style farmhouse is owned or rented out by somebody, and then he does this. He gets a Winnebago, a old trailer, a garage, and 4 or 5, or a big barn, and divides it up into places. And then he brings in entire families from Mexico, and they bring in dogs, cats, a lot of animals, horses, cattle. And something that is zoned for a single family is now maybe have 50 people. And all of these California rules that have to be maintained because we are a green sensitive state have to be suspended. And so what that means is all the people who follow laws have to be hyper-regulated to balance it out. So when I have a huge bin, but I also now have to separate my garbage from glass, from this, from plastic, and I also, on our land, we have an old pond, beautiful. It was one of the most beautiful places I thought in the world growing up. My brother sold it, it's a long story, but I walk around it every night. It's adjacent to my little 42 acres, the remnant of our farm. You should see it, Jack. I'll put some things on. It's just undescribable what it looks like. If you're an environmentalist and you believe in the pristine wildlife and natural habitat and fauna and flora, you would be shocked. And you would be shocked about the indifference people come in. They come in with, now this week there's a big new washer. In the almond orchard there's a big refrigerator. There is a dryer. There is a car seat. But most of it just wet garbage, just junk. And it's strewn all over the alleyways. It's into the bottom of the pond, so when the water comes in from the irrigation district, you get bottles and stuff that float up. And you see animals picking through it. There's a whole bunch of coyotes this morning I saw going through it. So my point is that there's no rules. So I asked a person once, a person who came out to inspect my solar panels. I got solar panels. It took 1 year to get the permits. And then when I put them on a beautiful shed that was built in 1980 and met code, they didn't know it was on their map. So they said, you know what, that's not on our map. And I said, it's because it's an ag exempt building and there was no law that you had to have a permit in 1980. You just had to meet code. And anytime they came out for another inspection, they looked at it. Oh, no, it has to pass. So I had to go reapply. Well, I said there's a mile away, there's 5 homes on a single dwelling zone place, and they're not homes. There's open Romex. There's porta potties with no septic. There's horses out in the middle of the road sometime. It's just a chaotic, and they're using this area. And he said, are you crazy? Why would I go over there? I said, what do you mean? Why would I go over there? There's Sureños, there's Norteños. You said, what would I do? Put a red tag on one of the Winnebagos and they're going to obey. In 30 days, they're going to have it up to code? There is no code. So I said, then you go after me? He said, basically, that's what we do. We go after people who follow the law. And we have millions of people who are on the other side of the law, not in a bad way. And he was defending them. I shouldn't present this as if he was criticizing them. So what I'm saying is that these people and Atherton they're hyper-regulated and they like this and they do not know where these people live. They must by needs live under different circumstances in hotels in the Queens or the Bronx, and they will not follow the protocols that everybody else has to follow. But if Gavin Newsom wanted really to stop the $76 billion deficit and he wanted to apply the law equally, I think he'd have a revolution. It wouldn't be about deportation alone. It would be about saying, you know what? We've got the biggest black market of any state in the union, and we're going to crack down on everybody who's not paying sales tax and not filing income tax. We're not going to have a cash society anymore. And if you're an electrician or you're a plumber, you're going to be paid on a payroll system. No more barter, no more cash. And I think it would destroy thousands of lives, and that's how it is. And all the people in Martha's Vineyard just see one aspect, so then they become very liberal. And giving somebody a puff jacket does not make you a saint. It really doesn't. You are employing somebody here who's illegally here, and that is not the end of it. That's the beginning of it. And so that's what Tom Hallman's trying to do. They're trying to say 55 million people that were not born in the United States, 16% of the population, some citizens, some green card, but the majority here illegally. It's too much. And we've got to go back to a normal application of the law. So if somebody wants to put solar panels on their shed, we are going to regulate them. Okay. But if somebody wants to rent out 5 Winnebagos, we're going to regulate them too. And it's not going to be that the people who were arrested for breaking the law, we're not going to say, oh, you're picking on migrants or you're a racist. No, we're going to treat people. It's racism the other way. The other way. You drove out 15 million people out of California, maybe 20 the last 40 years, because to subsidize this huge group coming in who needed to have parity, you taxed the hell out of the middle class, and the people who were wealthy were for all this because they were not subject to the consequences of their ideology. And these are the Martha Vineyard types of California. Just the way it is.
The solution is we should just tell China, and I think that's what Trump is going to do. Whatever you do to us, we're going to do to you. But when you don't stick up for yourself, then you get this. The reason that Karen Bass won that election was because a lot of white liberals voted for her because they felt that A, she was ideologically correct, as you said, a neo-communist, and B, she was a person of color, and they wanted to say, I voted for the first black woman mayor. They themselves would admit that they were selected on non-meritocratic grounds, and that was because Joe Biden announced in advance that he was narrowing his search only to people who were black and female for the next Supreme Court position and his vice presidency. The solution is we should just tell China, and I think that's what Trump is going to do. Whatever you do to us, we're going to do to you. Oh, we have a spy balloon. We didn't understand. It got off course. It's a weather balloon. Oh, it went right over 5 military bases. Oh, we're so sorry. Oh, we have a trade surplus with you. Oh, we're sorry. We didn't mean that. Oh, one of our missiles looks just like one of your missiles. It's just a coincidence. So, oh, one of your payroll departments at a major corporation had a cyber. Whoa, we're sorry. We had nothing to do with it. If you just treated them the way they treat us, and I think we'd get along fine. But when you get in these asymmetrical relationships where, for whatever reason, they're mostly caused by the left-wing globalists and utopians, and you allow these countries to take advantage. Another one is Turkey. You let them take advantage. That's a NATO country. And just because it has the largest army other than ours, and just because we have a base at Insularkman, they think they own us. And they do things that no other NATO ally would be allowed to do. But when you don't stick up for yourself, as Trump is trying to do, then you get this. And remember what Trump is doing. He's not doing this out of the head of Zeus. He's reacting to a prior Biden administration and an Obama pattern. So he is going back to the middle, not the extreme. The extreme is 12 million people walking into the United States. The extreme is having 330,000 Chinese students in the United States. The extreme is sending a balloon over here. The extreme is Vladimir Putin having cyber attacks and your president saying, please knock off the hospital ones. You know, that it's a return to normalcy, to quote famous, was that Harding or Coolidge, return of normalcy? I'm 71, I started in graduate school at 20, so for 50 years I've asked myself, the only way I can explain it is to capture to the best of my imagination very quickly this conversation I've had 1,000 times from the left. And it goes something like this. Well, Victor, quote unquote meritocracy is not meritocracy. It's a construct that you, of a privileged white male upbringing, have created artificial rules and regulations that other people of color and sexual orientation and gender obviously have not had the same experience. So you weighted this system to reward your background, your culture, and your prejudice, and then you called it, quote, quote, meritocracy. And then you say to them, well, how about Indian immigrants or Asians that, according to meritocracy, beat so-called white people in things like SAT verbal scores or per capita income? Oh, yes, that's what you do. You force other people of color to mimic as trained seals. I'm quoting somebody in The View that talked recently about Snoop Dogg. And they have to emulate, and then they master, and then they have to warp their lives. They have to get their kids like Professor Chu, they make them into to little automatons, and they have to just study all day to beat your system, where white kids don't have to do that. Asians can, yes, they can perform, but they're put under enormous pressure. And I've heard that my entire life, so that's what the left says. And then the final kicker is, you can get 50 of the most left-wing professors, and you tell them, we're going to fly a United flight through a lot of storms over to Europe, and we have a choice from somebody who has more experience, hours behind the wheel, and has higher ratings, and somebody that was picked more on, they're probably just as good, and there's a bottom line they both have to meet. Which do you want to go? But that they don't admit to that. But when you look how they operate, I can tell you from academia in their lives, they don't look at race when it affects them. It's only when they apply those rules to other people. So they think. And in the case of Los Angeles, you can make the argument that the reason that Karen Bass won that election was because a lot of white liberals voted for her because they felt that A, she was ideologically correct, as you said, a neo-communist, and B, she was a person of color, and they wanted to say, I voted for the first black woman mayor. The thing is about all of this DEI stuff is that the people that are criticizing Karen Bass now and Miss Quinones and the rest of them are all wealthy white. A lot of them are, most of them are, I mean, there's people in the inner city, they're wealthy white people. In other words, they're saying, we believe in DEI and stuff for you people, but not for us when it comes back and boomerangs us. And two of the greatest examples of that, Ketanji Brown, the Supreme Court Justice, and Kamala Harris, the Vice President, both of whom were appointed were nominated or selected by Joe Biden. If somebody, please correct me, but I was watching Justice Brown with her, she was in a Broadway play recently, and then she was the one about the gender question. I've read some of her opinions, and I've no need to talk about Kamala Harris. But whether you believe or not that they, on a meritocratic basis, would not qualify, they themselves would admit that they were selected on non-meritocratic grounds. And that was because Joe Biden announced in advance that he was narrowing his search only to people who were black and female for the next Supreme Court position and his vice presidency. Once he said that, and you brought up Karen Bass, she was one of the finalists for vice president, she along with Stacey Abrams. So he looked at Stacey Abrams, he said, this person is insane. She's still an election denialist. I can't do that. I can't. And then they looked at Karen Bass and said, they'll tear me apart, given her Castroite background. And then Kamala Harris. And they said, don't do it, Kamala Harris. You'll get word salad ad nauseum. Go back, Joe, and look at her 2020 primary. She called you a racist. I mean, 2020, and yet he did that, and so it confirmed the stereotype that you don't, and it was their stereotype that they created. And the reason I'm happy about this is that a lot of African American people who obviously have outshone by their innate ability all of the competition. For years, people would say, well, they're there because they're DI or there's, and now they don't have to worry about that. They really don't. They just say, you know what, I didn't get any particular advantage from the government. But what's different about Trump is that, like Reagan, he's old, but he has no prerequisites. He has no hierarchies. He has no protocol. So when he was in New York, I used to read stories about why people hated him, because he hung around with Mike Tyson, he hung around with Al Sharpton, he hung around with boxing promoters, King, who was completely disreputable. And when he surrounds himself by Steve Bannon, the way Steve Bannon dresses or looks, or he has no problems with having Fetterman come with his shorts, in other words, it gets him in trouble sometimes, but his attitude is he judges people on what their usefulness is and their ability is. And I think he got that from being a builder. And he got a lot of empathy for people who are not and he's an outsider too. I mean, with the mugshot, you talk to people in Manhattan and you ask them, Before Trump was president, was he on the A, B, or C list? And they will tell you the D list. They didn't want to go to dinner with him because he had declared bankruptcies, or he'd been married 3 times, or the way he looked was... And that plays to his advantage, that he does not judge people by the way that traditional Republicans do. If you come and talk to Trump, he's impressed by Harvard, Yale, and all that, but he's not exclusionary. So he will bring people around him of any background if he finds out they have talent, and that makes him accessible. So when you saw him go into Madison Square Garden right after, I have never seen right before the election a menagerie like that. I mean, he had on the one hand a button-down tie Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Then he had apostate RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. Then he had Hulk Hogan. Then he had Kid Rock. Then he had Joe Rogan. Then he had Dana White. You know, mixed martial arts. They were all there, and they were all getting along with each other, and they all had one thing in common. Nobody cares what we dress like. Nobody cares what we say. Nobody cares where we went to school, but we're all successful, and we have things in common. We all like the country, and Trump knows that. And it's, I don't think people ever saw that side of him. I'll give you an anecdote. When I was writing the first book, I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a very important financier in New York, and he said he could see sometimes out his window one of Trump's buildings, and no one knew that Trump was being watched. He didn't know. But he would get out of his car and go shake hands with the cement person, the electricians. There was no advantage other than as a businessman but he felt comfortable with him. Another person I asked him about who played golf with him, and he said, yes, he bets on all the time, and sometimes he quote unquote forgets his wallet when the bet is due. But he said, before I got angry, it wasn't very long at all after I had played with him and we were betting on holes and he wouldn't pay up, he would walk over to another group of caddies, Cuban Americans, and he'd come back and he wouldn't say anything. And then he got curious, and so after Trump left, he went over there, and he said he went over and gave us cash to send for our funeral for a family member to be buried. And he said the same thing. Another person said, you know, we went into Mar-a-Lago to eat, and all of a sudden he disappeared in the kitchen. So we didn't know what was going on. And then we found out he went into the kitchen and said, we closed the restaurant, so I have my friends over, and here's $200 for each of you, and lost tips in cash. So he has an empathy with working people. And that's why he couldn't fake that when he was those 2 iconic moments at McDonald's when that Indian American guy said, I'm just ordinary. And he just out of the blue said, you are not ordinary. And then his wife said, you took a bullet. And Trump just, I think I did. And it was, I guess I did take a bullet for you. And the same thing with the garbage truck. Nobody else could do that. Romney couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. It had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with attitude and ease with working people. And so that's what when I go to Stanford and I talk to people that despise him, which is most people, that is one of their greatest criticisms of it, that they feel that he has diminished the office because he has no regulations, he has no requisites, he has no restrictions on who gets to see him and the people he associates with. And so, and what Trump is saying is, well, I'm sure that all the people who sold out the country with Biden from China and Ukraine and all of his cronies had ties and suits and talked like they were normal. And I'm sure that Jack Smith and all the people who went out after me were all Harvard trained, or I'm sure that Anthony Blinken with his Harvard degrees or Yale degrees who called up and cooked up the 51 intelligence, but I don't do that. I don't care. And that really resonates. So there's a natural ease, and he doesn't judge people by their resumes or their titles or their degrees, and that comes across to his advantage. I'm a little worried about intrinsic paradoxes in the MAGA agenda, and I'll just name 2 very quickly or 3. So he had this populist tax cutting, and that meant no taxes on military people, no taxes on first responders, no taxes on Social Security, no taxes on tips. You total that up and it could total, in theory, $1 trillion. And then he says that he wants to build up the military and then extend tax cuts and maybe accentuate them. So that is predicated, that's never, so in the history of the American presidency, no president has ever been able to cut taxes and then grow the economy enough because of deregulation to get enough revenue without drastic spending. No one, Reagan failed. He had big deficits because he could not cut. So yes, all those tax promises will work, but only if Elon can cut $2 trillion. I'm not sure he can, because the discretionary spending is only 1/3 of the budget. And when you get on, Arnold Schwarzenegger here in California bragged that he could cut, and when the SEIU and the government employees unions went after him, they destroyed him. I mean, every night there were pictures of him with his cigar and his private jet, doesn't care about you. The other thing is, and we talked about very in passing, is Jacksonianism is that his foreign policy, no better friend, no worse enemy, no optional military engagements, it's all based on the creation of deterrence. And that means that from time to time he's going to have to use force, and he's going to have to be careful that he doesn't get involved and bogged down somewhere. He's going to pick and choose where he uses force to restore deterrence, and he has to explain to his MAGA base, this is not Iraq, this is not in Afghanistan, this is not nation building. So he's got to be very careful about that. That's another problem that he has. And then in the, and we've talked about the most obvious, that as a business person, he uses the H-1 visa, but he's got people around him that, unless he can convince them, that have abused that system. Under that statute, it says if you have a bachelor's degree and if you have a skill that there's not enough Americans who possess it, then you can allow people to come in pretty much freely and get almost an entirely renewable each year green card. And what's happened in Silicon Valley is when you have people graduating from Cal State Fresno or Cal State Bakersfield with coding degrees, and they go to Silicon Valley, they're bringing people in from Taiwan, Korea, but especially India, with BAs, and they're not paying them the $150,000 a year, they're paying them $70,000. And they'll, and so they are abusing that system. What it was really what it was envisioned is, we are short engineers at the PhD design level, and yet those countries do not like those PhDs to leave. They want their other people to come. And so he's going to have to tell the tech people, bringing in a lot of people with BAs and paying them almost nothing and having them almost as indentured is at our expense. So if you're going to keep that type of visa, then you're going to have to reflect its original intent, and you're going to cut it down to only people who are really rare, and we don't have enough of them. And that's true, but so the immigration thing is bad. The final thing, and I'll stop, is the reason that the deportations might work in a way that it caused massive resistance in the past is this time the 12 million people who came were not from Mexico. Usually Mexico was 90%. Now it's about 50%. And so there's not, for 50% of the people from Ukraine or Russia or China or Korea, whatever they are, they don't have a constituency here of expatriates who say, this is racist. So he's going to be able to deport a lot of Venezuelans and Colombians and Guatemalans and Chinese nationals and Middle Easterners and Syrian, and nobody's going to care because they don't have a community here that's going to say this is Islamophobic, all that. But if he continues that, So he's going to get rid of the people, the 700,000 that are felons, and then he goes down to the next 1.5 million that have already gone through the system. They were already adjudicated, they should not be here. They were ordered to be deported, and they never showed up. And that 1.5 million, there will be no problem. And then he's going to go into the next iteration, and those are people who are able-bodied, young, on public assistance and not working. No one's going to complain about that. But when he gets down to the 4th or 5th iteration, say 3 or 4 million after he's deported, he's going to get people from Mexico, a lot of them, and they're going to be some elderly, some young, but they're here because they have some kind of familial relationship. And speaking as someone in a community where it's 95% Mexican American or Mexican national or illegal alien, that's going to be a problem, because a lot of those people are not just on welfare, they're working. And so what is he going to do with the people who came here illegally, who deal in cash that hurts the economy, but they're laying cement or they're driving a tractor or they're working in a meat packing plant and they're not on welfare? Because that's his future constituent. I don't know what he's going to do about that, but that's going to come very quickly. The first year of deportations will be no objection, but if he goes down, as he's going to have to, because there's 12 million of them, and then we'll see what happens.